Canada's invented a lot of things. The Canadarm or kerosene or AM radio. And I thought, well, the canoe is the original Canadian invention, surely. And it's as valid today as it ever was. No canoe, no fur trade. No canoe, no exploration. No canoe, no romance for a great many people. And I started thinking more and more about it. It has no geographical boundaries, is completely ecologically sound, natural resources, even when it's at the end of its day, it returns to nature. Requires no fuel apart from human energy, and it basically can go anywhere.
Roy! Kevin! Roy MacGregor! I gotta say, I'm a little nervous.
Well, I have your books on the shelf back in there. Do you want me to go get them to prove that I'm nervous?
No, let's not be nervous together. Cheers!
Okay.
No, I'm a huge admirer of your writing, Roy, and a good friend of mine. You've helped me along the way for quite some time, so cheers to that. What are you drinking?
Well, my last name's MacGregor, so I'm bound to be Scottish and cheap. And I like peat, the taste of peat. I think this is superior to the bottle that Mr. Raffin had on your show previously. Thing is, we went down to last June, we went down to a wedding down east and did the Cabot Trail, and we stopped in at the distillery there that is doing Scotch.
Yeah.
And they gave us a flight, right? This one was done a year ago, this one 6 years now. And this one would be 30 years eventually. It wasn't quite up to 30. And no doubt, Kevin, it gets so much better.
I had a dream job, Roy. A number of years ago, I went to Scotland, and I actually got paid to paddle down the River Spey and to do a film and also an article on it. And I got to stay and stop at all the distilleries to do a tasting. And I had to pinch myself every day. I could not believe I had that job.
Let me see you jump. Get ready. Get. Venga. Ahí va allá. Todo el mundo. Let me see you jump.
I thought I would do this tonight because you're a famous Canadian writer. So this is whiskey with an E, not without the E.
I was going to bring that point up. And oddly enough, that's the whiskey that our son absolutely loves. He just he had me pick up a bottle the other day.
Oh, wow.
And I like it too.
I'm not a big whiskey with an E fan. I'll have it on ice whatever. But yeah, I just thought that would be, we do have some good, but yeah, I've gone to that place along the Cabot, and it's a lovely place and lovely whiskey. And it's really odd though, because it's like, no, you can't call this Scotch. It's not made in Scotland. I don't know if that's a big blooper.
Well, it's a huge thing that our son-in-law living close to here, he's best friends with a fellow from India. He's now Canadian, a Canadian citizen, but he comes from India. And he brought a bottle of Scotch made in India that was fabulous.
Yeah,
absolutely floored me.
Yeah, the Japanese make a really good Scotch too.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried them and they're really good. It's just, and my mom's Scottish, my dad's Irish, whatever. But yeah, it's without the, I guess, I don't know. I don't really care. It's a pandemic.
Well, I'm the opposite. My dad's Scottish, my mom's Irish.
Oh, my dad's passed away, but I'm the last male Callan from Ireland. So it was a big deal growing up that I was the last male. And my dad was a famous boxer, champion boxer. And of course, look at me, like that didn't happen. And then it wasn't until when my daughter was 5, I went to Scotland to meet all my relatives in Scotland. And that's when I found out the writing gene. So nobody told me, because it was all emphasized on me being connected to the Callan of Ireland, not the Lang from Scotland from my mom's side. And I met all my cousins from Scotland. They looked like me. And then I found out there were a whole bunch of writers. My cousin was the chief editor of the Edinburgh Times. She's the one that picked me up at the airport. She took me to the Bobby, you know, the statue in Scotland of the dog that didn't leave the grave. Well, I think it was my great grandfather that made the mold and the poem to go with it. Like, I didn't know that until just a few years ago.
Such a beautiful story.
Yeah. But I'm a boxer.
You look it.
Yeah, no, I'm not at all. All right, so Roy, who, what, where started you with this whole wilderness travel thing? You love the canoe, you love being in the woods.
It's a really difficult story because I was born in Whitney, which is right on the edge of Algonquin Park, and the Red Cross station there. And I was only 4 days old when my mother took me up to her parents' house, home with log cabin up in Lake of Two Rivers, right in the heart of the park. So I canoed. I don't remember canoeing. Right? I don't remember learning to canoe or anything. It just was something that we did. My mother was a very good canoeist. Her sister, Mary Pigeon, was a wonderful canoeist. You probably know Jake Pigeon up at Brent. He's my cousin, Tom Pigeon. They were the ace canoeists of Algonquin Park. So I feel really diminished when I'm around people like that because all I did was canoe. And I didn't get really wilderness canoeing until years back. Ellen and I married. We went off. We started doing canoe trips, but Algonquin Park is very much flat water in that part of the park, as you well know. And so it's quite casual and quite easy. And I began 20 years ago or so to get into, I wanted to do some white water. So I was introduced to this fellow called Phil Chester, who lives up in Deep River. And he and I became whitewater partners and started doing the rivers, and I became very hooked on it.
So why Algonquin then? I mean, obviously you were born right on the border. Why still the connection with that park? You've written a lot about Algonquin. Yes.
Well, I mean, I couldn't avoid it because my grandfather, whom I idolized, was the chief ranger of Algonquin Park. My great aunt, Winifred Trainer, was engaged to Tom Thompson. My father, Duncan, worked his entire life and lived his entire life in the bush of Algonquin Park. He worked in the lumber industry. And so we spent every summer like solid through the summers there and continued to go back. And it has become my place to be. And it's where I feel mostly like me, and it's where I'm happiest by far.
So it's you're familiar, you're connected to it, you're familiar with it. Do you have the desire to broaden that, to go beyond Algonquin?
Oh, yes. Yeah, one of our daughters moved out originally to British Columbia. Now she's in Calgary, but had us come out there, and she said, we're going to run the Kokanee River. And oh my God, it was just a sensation to be on water that I hope you've had this experience on those mountain-fed waters that are so crystal clear. You think you're hitting every rock that you see, and you see them absolutely perfectly. And you just go, and then you think you're flying. It's like flying. It's the most amazing experience of all. And the best part of it is, you don't even need a paddle. You just sit there and go. I guess you could direct it a bit and try to avoid the widowmakers and that, but boy, it was a delight.
That's amazing.
Oh, I've done some other rivers.
Well, you also, one of your recent books is only like a year old, I think. You actually wrote a book on famous Canadian rivers.
Yes.
And so what was your favorite river in that book? That's a bad question. It's not like saying what's your favorite child, but
well, I can answer that one. They're so different. I mean, I did 16 rivers. Hugh Maclean, who had done the original Rivers of Canada book, he did 8 rivers. You could do 32 or 64 rivers, and there would still be people saying, you didn't have the Nahanni in there, you didn't have this, you didn't have that. And they'd be right, because there's hundreds, and you probably know better than anybody in this country how magnificent the rivers are of this country. Let me take 2, if I may, and I'll talk the difference of them, because there's such a divergency. The one that I fell in love with, I would have to say, was the Des Moines. Up there, Wally Shaver's River, and it's no dams on it. It's almost like pristine. It's the closest pure wilderness river to Ottawa. There is not very far from Ottawa, and absolutely delight to run. The Petawawa is not too far from there too, and I absolutely am crazy about the Petawawa. But you can write about the thrills of the whitewater, the beauty of nature, and all the things you love. But there are other rivers that suffer. So I was told partway through you got to do the Don River. Are you kidding me? I said, the Don River, that cesspool? No, you go down and study it. You want to have a look at it. And so I went and did the Don River. I kayaked it, which is a little different from paddling, but it was interesting. You know, the Don Valley Parkway is right there. And then I started realizing that once this river was the original cottage country, the people who had money, like the early governors of Canada West and that, built cottages up along it. It was abused and diverted so that they could put the parkway in. And I came across a story that absolutely flabbergasted me. And it was in 1957, Princess Margaret was on a royal tour. And she was, at that point, one of the most, with Grace Kelly, one of the most glamorous women in the world. She was single. She danced with John Turner out in Victoria, and the big talk of the romance of the handsome young lawyer and the beautiful princess was on. And she was going to go to Toronto. And they wanted to have her come down on the royal train. There was a train tracks that went down the Don Valley at that point. So they would come down on the royal train, it would stop, and she would cross a footbridge and go to River Park, or Riverview, is it? And meet thousands and thousands of children who would be singing God Save the Queen, waving the Union Jack and that. 1957, the city of Toronto got quite concerned about the stink of the river at that time. It had already caught fire a few times. You don't know that story, but it did catch fire, and it did stink. So they sent engineers out to see what could be done. And engineers came up with this amazing plan of timing the drift of the water perfectly. The train stops. She starts walking. As she nears the bridge upstream, they release hundreds of gallons of perfume. At the exact moment she crosses that bridge, this beautiful Dior odor comes up. Beautiful wafting perfume. So she had this delightful smell of the Don River. It continued on killing plants and fish all the way to the Lake Ontario. Well, that's 1957. I was alive then, and I think about the way things have changed. So the Don was also, it was another decade after that, where the University of Toronto students put together a funeral for the Don River. They marched a casket full of water down the streets, and that was where Pollution Probe began. Out of Pollution Probe, you get the whole environmental movement, which is now saving rivers. You have the Friends of the Don Valley and the Friends of the Don River working hard to clean up what can be cleaned up. And then I think it was 2 summers ago, there were photographs of a family of beavers having established, muskrats having established itself on the banks of the river and then playing in the river and catching fish and that. And the salmon somewhat had come back. So to me, the Don, which I had despaired doing, it became an inspirational river.
That's interesting because the Grand is a good example too. I mean, the Grand has come back incredibly. The amount of people that go on the Grand.
Yeah, I did the Grand and really fell in love with it. I didn't realize how beautiful that part of southwestern Ontario is. The old stone farmhouses and barns, and the work of the stonemasons along there, the recovery of the trout and the salmon, or the fly fishing. And of course, it's the Laura Gorge and all those spectacularly beautiful spots along it. I was quite impressed by the Grand, which I did not know.
This area has rare Carolinian forest, so forests that you'd find in North and South Carolina. They call this the banana belt. So because it's just a few degrees warmer, we don't get as many days of freezing. We get more thaws through the winter. So we have cottonwood trees. We have tulip trees, which is almost semi-tropical. They have a big flower that looks like a tulip. They grow like 75 feet high. We have Kentucky coffee trees. We have shagbark hickory. We have sycamore trees and a lot of black willow. All these species in Canada are endangered or threatened can be found along the Grand River. Largely because the Carolinian forest has so many species. It's the most biodiverse area in Canada. So there's like several thousand species of plants and animals. So that makes it really biodiverse and a lot of stuff you wouldn't find elsewhere in Canada other than maybe along the north shore of Lake Erie.
When did you start writing about this? Do you all of a sudden just wake up one morning and have an epiphany that you're going to be a famous Canadian author?
Well, I never wrote about nature or anything for many, many years. When I started, I think I started writing about nature so that I could spend more time at the cottage. And so I could flog some columns to whatever paper I was at the time with the magazines and write about the Algonquin area or various small towns. I'm very interested in small towns and spend more time at the cottage. And then from that, I just drifted into more and more interest in I did a book on escape. You know, people, this drive inside of, I think, all Canadians to escape every now and then. You know, this the historian W.L. Morton called it an alternative penetration into the wilderness and back. That is the thing that keeps Canadians stable. Cabin fever would be a better word. I think it just sums it all up. And we're feeling it right now, aren't we? With a really brutal winter and then a really, really ridiculous pandemic. How do we get out on the water? How soon can we get out on the water? So that's the escape factor. And I became really interested in that. And I thought, eventually started thinking that spend so much of my time talking about how hockey explains this country. Nothing explains the country better than a canoe. No canoe, no country. No canoe, no Canada. No canoe, no Indigenous travel for trade and trapping and hunting. No canoe, no exploration. No canoe, no settlers. It's just no canoe, no economy, because the original economy, you know, the original Western so-called economy was the fur trade. Canoes again.
No, it's funny. I actually had a question written down here about the hockey stick and the canoe, and you just answered it right there. Oh man, what is your fascination with Tom Thomson? What's with that? You're just, I mean, you've written well, that again is only like a year, maybe even not even 2 years old, but you wrote the book on Tom Thomson. What's your whole fascination with that?
Well, it comes from the family. My grandfather, the chief ranger of Algonquin Park, hated Tom Thomson. Thought he was a lazy bum and a no good, drunk and a person who swore, all the things that my grandfather was against. My great aunt was always said to have been engaged to him. There was a rumor around that she had been left pregnant by him, which I have come to believe was the fact, what did happen. And also he painted so beautifully the places that I love so much. So I became very, very interested in him. I originally wrote a novel called Shorelines, which is based on the life of Tom Thomson, a Winifred trainer. And then many, many, many years later, I did Northern Light, which was a nonfiction book on Tom Thomson. There's been many, many books written on Tom Thomson. There have been lots of people who criticize that you shouldn't speculate on that. But what else do you have? What else do we have but speculation? We're never going to know. I absolutely welcome every person who has ever written about Tom Thomson. There's no proprietorial side to it, although I know some people who have felt that way, that they're, you know, this is my book or my story. I love every story from I think it was Bernard Shaw's description of what killed Tom Thomson was not accidental drowning, was not murder. What happened was he ran into a water spout in the middle of July in 1917, and the water spout spun him and the canoe up above Canoe Lake. He had been fishing at the time, so at the same time as this canoe was spinning around, his rod was spinning around, and it wrapped fishing line 17 times around his left ankle. And then as he fell down, he hit his head on the thwart, but on the point of the bow, and that's what killed him. And that's why the canoe was upside down. And you know, to me, that's absolutely fair game. Good for you, I say to him. Let's hear all the theories on it. We're not going to know. We're never going to know. I hope we don't know. Tracy Thompson, the great-grandniece of Tom Thomson, has told me, she said, at this point in our lives, the art and the mystery are entwined as one. Each is as important as the other. Let's just let it be. Let him be wherever he is. I believe he's at Canoe Lake, absolutely. Others believe he's buried in the Leith Cemetery, the family plot. Maybe he's in both. I don't know. Whatever, I find him fascinating. I find his love of nature just worshipful. And I find the story of the mystery as good as it gets in Canada, because if this was an American story, we'd have Tom Thomson land in Algonquin Park, and people would line up to take shuttle buses in 40 minutes to the next, you know, the ride that's going to flip the canoe up in the air in the water spout. And Tom Thomson, you go to Canoe Lake, it's reverential. There's nothing gaudy there at all about it. This is where you can go up to the cemetery and you won't even believe that anybody else has been there for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I find that amazing. I don't know if that's a Canadian thing or what, it's just depopulation in Canada versus other places, but yeah, that's true. All right, so do you actually write to inspire yourself to go out in the wilderness, or do you go out to the wilderness to inspire yourself to write?
I don't know. I think sometimes I write the way a dog attacks fleas. I just can't help it. I just keep going. I mean, I've now written, I'm up around 55 books, so I've written more books than I've read.
Really?
Gotcha. But I mean, I've never been able to explain the volume. People have often asked me about it. I can't explain it. I certainly, if I were out in the wilderness, I'm not taking notes or anything like that, but I sure am thinking. And often I'm so far off. And does this happen to you? You're out traveling you're going down a river and you've maybe been going for days or something like that. Your mind's on another planet. Do you get that way sometimes? Like, where am I? What am I doing? Who's this?
It's really interesting you say that because a lot of people, they know me, but they don't know me. But my canoe partners do know me, and good friends know me. And I'm the most calmest person on a canoe trip, and I don't say much. I don't talk much.
No.
It's really bizarre because that's all I do at home. I'm a very hyperactive person.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, but when I'm in the woods, well, after day 3, the first 2 days, maybe not. But after day 3, not much. And by day 20, you're not getting a word out of me. So
isn't that the truth? No, I mean, we are not the first to say this at all, but I buy into it completely that if the Canadian educational curriculum, if the federal government were actually in charge of education, that's, gave it to the provinces. If there were a curriculum that some point in high school, let's say grade 10 or grade 11, you went off on a 3-week canoe trip, highly organized, with great concern about safety and everything, done correctly, and because you do these things. I truly believe it would be the best part of any child's education before they get off to university. I absolutely believe that to the bottom of my heart.
So what happened?
I got bit a lot. Mommy forgot the bug suit.
First time outside.
Screw up.
Hasn't left the house from GTA.
Is that one day?
Yeah, that's from one day.
That was last night.
Yeah, well, that was all day yesterday. In the course of all day yesterday, yeah.
Are you having fun?
Yeah, I am. My legs are a little itchy, other than that, yeah, it's fine.
So what do you think of the day so far?
Oh, it's blonde diggity, Catching some rays out on the waters with the boys. Can't complain.
Yeah, there's a problem when someone asks for duct tape. All right, so that's what's going on day 2 of the Kawartha Highlands Kenner expedition. I've heard stories about Kenner High School. They're all true. You don't like the battle partner?
I parked that boat.
Oh! What happened to you on the portage?
Oh, I broke my ankle. Not actually, I sprained it.
Just a sprain. We got a sprained ankle. We got a dog that wants to leave.
That portage took us about 2 hours.
Really?
Yeah. Honestly.
Holy.
Well, it's a good thing we only did one today.
Arms are chicken tenders.
What is that?
You know any of those box of frozen chicken fingers you get?
Jane's.
Jane's right here. That's where you find them. You grill them up, get some plum sauce, dip them in, chicken tender.
So you're tenderized.
Oh yeah.
So here's my canoe partner for the day.
Hello, nice to meet you.
I like your glasses.
Thank you. I got them at Walmart pretty cheap there. I thought I would, go cheetah.
So what made you go on this trip?
I love it.
Yeah?
I love it out here, yeah. But why not?
It's a nice hat you have. It's not buggy. It's not buggy at all.
Nope.
What do you got to say for yourself?
That was terrible.
My name's Seth Rogan, and I approve this message.
Portage, awful. Can we just paddle the whole way home?
I think I'm
gonna go home.
That's only the first portage.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go home.
Kevin, you're supposed to be pumping us up for this. Come on.
No, let's just go home.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll swim across the lake.
Hey, boys! Let's get on the lake!
Calm down there.
I can't breathe.
I love the bug jacket and shorts and that. Oh, come on, those socks are awesome. I gotta go. Look at this outfit right here.
Cooperation, no whining, working together, enjoying nature, getting along, singing, playing, having fun, seeing nature, appreciating nature.
Is that because in nature there's no facade? You are who you are. You can't fake yourself out there.
We do see people doing it, though, don't we? I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's funny. Often you'll hear people talking, and you're very quiet about it, or most of us will be quiet about it, and we realize they're just totally BSing. They're BSing what they did or what they pretended to do, what they wanted to do. I like the quiet people.
Yeah. What's the term? Closet introverts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a term. I don't know. Oh my Lord. I haven't even started. Okay. Life in the Bush. How did that book come about? Because that's a deep book.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to write it. There was a publisher at Penguin called Cynthia Good, very good publisher. And I had written a chapter or small section about my father in a book that Ken Dryden and I had done together about my dad going to the Hockey Hall of Fame and my dad's living in the bush. And then I'd often talk to her about what an eccentric my father was. He lived his whole life in the bush. He was the best read person I ever knew. All kinds of funny stories, because he could be pretty funny. And she said, "You've got to write a book on your dad." Well, who would be interested in a book on my father? You know, he was a lumberman. He worked in Algonquin Park, and his great passion was fishing. And I sat down and started doing it, and I did it. And I gave it to my older brother Jim to read, my younger brother Tom to read. My older brother Jim thought it was great. You know, you expect maybe there would be a little friction there. There was none. And then it did well. It won a bunch of awards, and I still ran into people who say that the book meant so much to them. I also ran into people that I thought about 10 pages into the book, Duncan MacGregor, who's my father, ceased to be Duncan MacGregor, my father, and became their eccentric old uncle, their odd grandfather that they had loved and lost, their character that they had known along the way, characters that we no longer seem to have in the world.
To me, it's it's actually one of my favorite books. But what's really cool is I teach a lot of young people, and a lot of them don't read, especially males. And they'll just say, "Well, Kevin, just give me a book that I'll read," and that's the one.
Really?
Yeah. Even if they don't have a father, which I don't get the connection, but they'll come back to me. That, and actually, to be quite honest, and it's nothing to do with your book, the other book that they'll love is Deliverance. It's a really good book.
Oh, yes.
It's well written, that book. I mean, yes, the movie, we all get the movie, but the book. So those are the two books that they find.
Oh, he's a poet.
I can't believe I just said that to you. Roy, my students either like your book or Deliverance.
I do not play the banjo.
Oh, my Lord, man. Well, thinking about that too, where have we gone since then? You think about when that movie came out, Deliverance, in 1972, canoe tripping increased in popularity by over 60% in North America, because that's what people wanted to do at the time. They wanted freedom. They wanted to go tripping in the wilderness.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. In fact, Canoe and Kayak magazine, their very first magazine, the front cover was that movie.
Oh.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. Because it really is bizarre. And also that transition of the Grumman canoe and the cedar canvas canoe, that was all projected in that film. They put that in there. So I'm blabbing. But how have things changed in the canoe community? If you think back in those days, and you probably weren't writing about canoeing back then, you were writing about hockey, but how have things changed ethically, motivation for people to get out there, the skills people have to get there, Canadians in general in connection with the canoe? Has it changed? Good, bad, ugly?
Both, I suppose. The canoe has lost a lot of ground to the kayak, and that's not a bad thing. A lot of people really prefer and are loving kayaking. It's some wonderfully built kayaks. The canoe itself has changed dramatically, as you well know. Those heavy old canoes that we used to try to lug around. And now the last canoe that Ellen and I bought was, I think, 38 pounds or 42. It was balance it on your finger almost. But tents. First time we went out, the tent itself weighed as much as the canoe, and the portage in the tent was a burden. Now the tent's just a little light thing that's parting your back. Barrels, which I guess we owe Wally Shaver and his trailhead people for the barrels. We used to not know what to do with the food, for example, you know, try to hide it or whatever. Now you throw it in a barrel, hike it up on a tree, and it's perfect. But also the apparel, there's been so much advance. And if I think about what my dad wore when he was in the bush, and that would be long johns well into June, and as early in August as he could. You know, now they have this lightweight stuff that almost dries completely instantly. It's fantastic. The paddles, you know, I remember, I guess I was doing the, what trip, anyway, first time I ever saw people with the curved paddle, you know,
the night shaft, yeah.
That has changed. You mentioned ethics at the first, and I think they have improved. I think there's a very strong environmental, don't leave a mark ethic out there that catches on more and more. Some people have had it for years, but each year I think more and more people get that way, that you are a guest in whatever wilderness area you're in. You owe it to your fellow people, and if you want to say to God or whatever it happens to be your beliefs, you owe it to leave it as you found it, or better than you found it if that's necessary.
Well, you know, interesting, of all the people I've interviewed the last couple of months of the pandemic that are older, like Cliff Jacobson, Michael Peake even the other day too, he said to say hello. They all said the same thing. And I don't know why, but I was waiting for the other. I was waiting for them to say, well, you know, the young people don't care anymore, blah, 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 blah. I don't know why, because I work with youth and I see the positive experiences that I have with them. But all of them said the exact same thing, that actually it's improved. Is that because we're spending more time in nature, or what? What's the difference?
Appreciating nature more. I think one of the, there are many, many differences between the United States and Canada, as we know, and they've perhaps never been more apparent than they are lately when it comes to leadership and that. But I've always been fascinated by the absolute loyalty, reverential, really, that Americans have to their college. Their college, that's why you're going to have a 100,000 seat stadium at the University of Michigan or whatever, and the money that goes back from alumni and that. Canada doesn't have that. We don't, universities have trouble getting money from their alumni and that. You know where the loyalty lies in Canadians? In Canadians who are somewhat privileged, I have to add this in, and that's the summer camp. The summer camp is what bred this love of nature and this love of canoe tripping and that. I never went to a summer camp, but of course I knew people who did. As I got older, I ran into more and more people who did. 9 times out of 10, if I meet someone out on a trail or out on a wilderness trip and we start talking, they will eventually get around to what camp they went to, whether it's a church camp, or Boy Scout camp, or one of the many, many camps that are spread out across the country that are privately run and often brilliantly run. That's a wonderful, wonderful legacy that they have left behind. And I dread the thought that those camps might not even be able to open up this year. But do you agree with me that there's this link to summer camps that is stronger than any link to schools?
Let the spirit of the wind prevail and guide our destiny.
I don't get homesick at camp. I get camp sick at home. So
big time. And because I see the magic happen. I take youth out in the woods. I've worked at camps. I've worked in a lot of things with youth. And I see the magic happen. It's hard to explain to everybody how it happens. But when I found out the other day that it's not going to happen for overnight camps, in fact, I was interviewing Project Canoe the other day too, and they're trying to get around it. They're trying to figure out, but they're like, yeah, do you think that what you're saying is true, that camps have changed us as Canadians or reconnected us with wilderness, the youth especially, because of that, and that can't happen during the pandemic? When this is all over, and hope to God this is all over, will we learn from that and progress, or will we go back in time?
Well, we always hope for the former, don't we? That we'll learn from it. I'm gardening, Kevin. You're looking at somebody whose muscles are now built from dandelions. I'm out there working hours every day. Ellen is a passionate gardener. We go to the gardening places and they're packed. You think that the grocery stores are busy or whatever. Go to a gardening center. You got to line up and you got to be processed and that. So I think that there's this almost this victory garden return, you know, from the wars and that. People are planting gardens, planting produce and that, but also falling in love with gardens. They're falling in love with watching the birds out their back door if they're lucky enough to have a backyard and a feeder, because there's nothing else to do. Yeah, I mean, we are locked in. And as you said earlier when we were chatting, all these animals that are suddenly showing up. There were 2 bear sightings in my little community here just outside of Ottawa today and last night. You're seeing all sorts of animals and that. New appreciation for them. Will it stick? I always hope it will, but then I have to realize now I'm getting to be an old man and maybe some of your wishes don't come true. Will people just blow it away and get back in their super hyped up boats and roar down the lake and kill the loons and that? Yeah, there'll be a bit of that for sure. We know there will be. We've seen enough COVID-idiocy, is that the right word for it, already in the parks in Toronto and that. So yeah, there'll be returns to that. But I still think there will be a good percentage of people who will say, slowing down wasn't that bad. Looking around you wasn't that bad. Listening wasn't that bad. Seeing things for the first time wasn't that bad. I've now recognized about 40 new birds that I never even knew were in my community. And you know what? I grew my own tomatoes this year. So yeah, I'm very hopeful, but I'm always hopeful. People sometimes tell me, yeah, you see the world through rose-colored glasses. Yeah, maybe I do. I always, my glass is half full, which makes me think maybe I should go fill this again.
I don't want to be your judgmental, but I already filled mine without you even knowing. All right, you've written a children's series, Screech Owl, which is very, very popular. My daughter knows all about it. You've written about the hockey. You've basically written a lot about the history of Canada. This book here is all about the history of the canoe in Canada. Was it a massive seller? Did you become a millionaire after this book?
No, I think it was a bust.
Really?
I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but it did not sell as I thought it would and hoped it would. I don't know the numbers. I can't give you any numbers, but I can tell you that it has not made back its advance. So, you know, as a publisher or a writer yourself, you know what that means. When they put the brackets at the end of your statement, it means you still owe us money.
I know the brackets, Roy. I know the brackets. Actually, Wilderness Pleasure and also Quetico, the Quetico Guide. I'm still in the brackets. I still haven't paid the advance off for those books.
Disappointed. I'd have to say that what I call nature writing has not sold as well. It seems to have a niche market in the United States, but then they're 10 times the market, right? There's definitely a niche market in Canada. We have our loyal readers and we're passionate about things, and every once in a while a nature book creeps up the bestsellers list. But if you're planning to make a living doing that, it's a tough road to hoe.
Well, then why do it, Roy?
Well, I did it out of passion. Also, I thought maybe I might be able to write off one of my canoes.
That's a good answer. Oh my Lord, I have not kept the script at all. What was it? Thompson. Oh my Lord. I gotta ask you a question though. I haven't asked anybody at all. So I've done almost 20 of these interviews in the last pandemic. And I'm not sure if you know who I've interviewed, but who else should I interview? Do you know people in the canoe world that I should put on my list?
Have you done Wally Shaver?
He's on my list. I haven't contacted him yet, but he is on my list about the Des Moines, especially with his book on the Des Moines for sure. Good guy. Also, Paul Mason, he's on the list, but he's actually sick right now. He's got laryngitis, and it's not COVID type. So yeah.
But you did do Becky?
Yeah, Becky and Reed for sure.
Good.
Yeah.
One of my great regrets in life is not ever meeting Bill Mason. So, I mean, I'm glad that I was able to meet the children. So that's good. Phil Chester, who's up in Deep River and not well known, but he's very, very funny. Hilarious, actually.
Yeah, he's on my list.
Oh, is he?
Oh yeah.
Well, his great line is, Pierre Burton's great statement about a Canadian as someone who knows how to make love in a canoe. Phil Chester says, a real Canadian knows to take out the center thwart before making love in a canoe.
That's how I know him.
And the canoe had another great advantage over, say, the bicycle or the front porch, in that people soon discovered that it was the great way to court. And canoodling, that famous word that we aren't supposed to say, actually had a very nice connotation at one point. It was just meant to be the romance of the canoe. Chaperones wouldn't get in canoes. So you could paddle off, we'll be right back, and then slip under the willow tree. And you never know what would happen. And canoe clubs became extraordinarily popular, especially in the United States, and it had an awful lot to do with courting. They even built, the Canoe Museum had a magnificent exhibition last year. I don't know whether people saw it. I hope you did, because it was really good. And they even had one of these specially built courting canoes in there that had a built-in gramophone. It was fantastic. And of course, there's this, and then there's that. And
great interview, which would be interesting to you, but you can't get, and that would be Justin Trudeau, who's very connected to the canoe through his father, and loves to talk about it. But I mean, I talked to him about it years before he became Prime Minister. I don't think he...
Yeah, I think he's a little busy now. Yeah, he might be a little busy, yeah. During your time in the Globe Mail, you're still writing for the Globe Mail, right?
I've now retired. I took the buyout along with many other people. So now I wish I was still there.
Well, when you wrote for the Globe Mail, I know, I read your pieces a lot, and now and then you would write about the canoe and then other things too. Did your colleagues, not your bosses, whatever, but your colleagues, did they all say, oh no, not another canoe article? Did that ever come up, or did they actually inspire you to do that?
Not that I ever heard, but I probably did. I used to write a lot about dogs, and I presume people were saying, oh no, not another dog article. But a lot of people write about dogs, and you hear that all the time. So people who love dogs, and that's all you need to know. And I presume people who love canoes love canoes.
Do you think writers or artist people right now, they're basically the groundwork for us right now? Because I find right now that's getting people through this pandemic, through the boredom, through the isolation, it's not really economics. I mean, we're all losing. It's actually the arts, the art world. Do you think actually that's true?
It's certainly a major factor. I mean, if you're an entertainer, who are you entertaining? You can go on your computer and do podcasts and that, and it's seen as a good cause, but I don't see any money coming in to these people to pay the bills. If you're a writer, and you had a book coming, let's say you're a first-time author and your book was slated to come out on April the 12th, 2020, your heart would be broken right now. Because it might have come out, let's say the schedule, you couldn't stop it, but it got no attention. You did no publicity. No one was walking up to you and ask for an autograph. All the lovely little perks that come with the first publication, they're all gone for those people. Established writers, I think, are wondering what to do. You mentioned earlier about them not wanting people to write about pandemics, now they want something different. I think that's a huge factor. I hope there are people out there writing funny stuff. I hope there are people out there writing inspirational stuff. I hope there are people out there writing adventure that can whisk you away from this. I also believe, going back to the rose-colored glasses, that we're going to get through it, and we're going to get through it probably with a vaccine, and it's probably going to happen within the year, hopefully even less.
Well, all right, that's a good ending. And you know what? I'm really bad at book titles and article titles. I'm really, really bad at it, but I'm good with endings.
Un moment. I should know a Scotch saying to when you salute for a Scotch, but I don't know. We need JR here for that, don't we?
Yes,
Let's go. Cheers. And thank you for a wonderful chat. Enjoyed it hugely.
Hey, what's your next book? What's going on?
Well, right now I'm helping an Indigenous leader from British Columbia with his book on First Nations leadership. His name is Clarence Louie. He's the chief of the Osoyoos Indian Band. And he is, wow, he's a firebrand. He is really an interesting person. We've been friends for many years. But it's his book. I'm not writing it for him. I'm really helping him a lot. And this is awkward. I'm thinking about a memoir, just writing about, odd. At the moment, I'm doing vignettes. So I'm writing a vignette about working with Stephen Harper in his hockey book. Being with Jean Chrétien the time his son tried to burn down his house and covering up the story. Going to church with the Queen of England when I was dressed exactly like I am today. I'm wearing shorts and golf shirt and that. I somehow ended up in church with the Queen. And so they're amusing me. Whether there's a book there or not, I don't know.
Well, you said it's awkward. Why is that awkward?
Because having spent 47 years writing about not me, suddenly to write about me.
But you have written about you. I mean, because every writer writes about their life experiences indirectly or directly, right? I mean,
yeah.
So why not? Why not do that? Is it because only people that at a certain age write their memoirs, or I mean, what's holding it back? No, really, seriously, Roy. Like maybe you should have done this 20 years ago.
No, I think now would be the time, or in a little bit. So, there's lots of fun stuff to write about that I never was able to write about before. I was, when Wayne Gretzky retired, I became his ghostwriter for a column. So we worked together for a year or more. Just all the different situations you would find yourself in that I wasn't able to write about at the time properly, and now I'm able to write about with perspective. So, including growing up in Algonquin Park, and I think that to me is of real importance to get that down in paper. What it was like to be so isolated, but feeling like the richest person in the world.
That's interesting because I just during the early part of this pandemic, I heard Margaret Atwood on CBC saying, to writers right now, Canadian writers, that it's a great time to write a book right now because you're in isolation and we're used to being in isolation. And I tried a bunch of different ideas, and all of a sudden one day I realized I was writing a memoir. I was like, oh my God, I'm only 56 years old. What am I doing this for?
Well, we're going to see a flood of memoirs after this. Guaranteed. You can't go anywhere. I did have another book project, which I won't mention, but it required traveling an awful lot. And so that's been shelved and maybe shelved forever. I don't know.
Yeah.
My memories aren't shelved. I can sit there and write that. And also I can, because of search engines and that, you can find out things that you wrote that you completely forgot about. I wrote that. I was there. What the hell?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, you do think about that. I think as artists, we all are sort of saying that this is not a good time. We're deep emotional, deep thinking people, but also we're creating really good material right now. So
yeah. And going back just a little bit to what we were talking about, so much reflection going on that as long as you're, and I understand people have mental health issues and that, as long as you're not suffering from anxiety, too much anxiety, everybody's got anxiety or depression and that, the reflection is good because there's something to be said for slowing down, taking stock and rethinking who you are and who your family, what your family's all about and what your priorities are in life. And boy, it stares you in the face every day now when you wake up. So let's look at it as a good thing.
Okay, I'm ending on that one. That's a good cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. That was fun.
Salute. Woo!
The Prime Minister of Canada and Little Bill Mason got into a heated argument. Bill, who spoke in a kind of a squeaky voice, said, "What the hell's the maple leaf doing on the Canadian flag?" Pierre Trudeau had been elected in 1965, the year that they brought the Canadian flag in, and of course loved the Canadian flag, said, "The people love it. We put it on there. No, it should be a canoe. He said, "You want to have the canoe on there? The damn maple leaf, it only goes out as far as Winnipeg at the most. You don't find it anywhere in the north. It doesn't exist in the vast majority of our country, but the canoe is everywhere. So it should be the Canoe. And Pierre Trudeau argued back and forth, you can't now change, you can't take the red maple leaf off the flag and put the Canoe on. But Bill thought you could. And if you think about it, it would have made a very, very nice flag. We all love the Canadian flag as it is, but I think that the Canoe on the flag would have been ideal. So I kind of vote for Bill on that one.